So I'm welcoming Inga to talk with today. We had a really wonderful conversation before, and I wanted to be able to host her here. So, Inga, thank you so much for coming. And I thought we'd just start with you sharing a little bit about what was a most big turning point, awakening moment for you in your spiritual process.
Yeah, well, that's a good question. First of all, Lisa, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure connecting with you again. Yeah, that's a very rich question. I always felt I kind of had many micro awakenings, micro doses of awakenings because too much too soon, right? Um, and one of but the biggest one, it was an interesting story actually. I went, that's 15 years ago. I decided to spend 3 months in Jerusalem as a volunteer in a guest house, like a convent guest house in the old city. So it was kind of like a pilgrimage. Um, and I saw it as a, kind of a Christian connection more so than anything, so I could explore the holy places. And of course, the place started working me over beyond what I had expected. Lots of things happened, some miraculous meetings, people, everything started shifting. And it was a bit scary because I kind of felt like, on the one hand, that I was losing the icons, the templates, the kind of the paradigm that kept me safe, and I was being washed onto this, like, just something so much bigger than me and anything I had believed in. And it felt like, oh, am I losing my faith? Am I like, is this it? Am I drowning? Um, but at the same, and it felt also like going deeper into the shadow, like knowing myself from the sides I didn't necessarily want to see before. Not that anything happened, it was more like an internal state, like, oh my goodness, this is who I am. I can be scared and brave and passionate and lazy and all of those things at the same time. And so that one took a few years to settle in. It kind of sent me on a spiritual search in many different directions. But so I think it was an influence of a place, and also being open and exposed to so many different traditions, that I was forced to find my place in it. Okay, where am I? Where do I stand? And that's very scary piece of thinking, oh, what am I? Do I even exist? Oh, that's not a pleasant one. Do I even exist? Um, and eventually, it kind of settled onto going more. I did some later on. I had to do some healing work on myself, so I started working with it, with energy healing and etc. But I ended up landing into a more grounded spiritual path. Like, mine is connected with the Sufi tradition, where I felt it still gives structure while kind of resting in that very non-dual awareness, but appreciating the paradox. So since then, let's say I'm learning every day to become comfortable with paradox. And it kind of feels a bit like a path of unlearning, like forgetting everything I know rather than getting new things. Um, but yeah, I hope that made sense in terms of the beginning.
Absolutely, absolutely. I want to highlight a couple of things that you said. I really like that you said there's a lot of micro awakenings, because so many people are attached to having a moment that kind of just, I don't know, they think that their humanness will be gone and that something else will show up. That it's a recognition of what we already are, and it's a recognition that doesn't have to happen all at once.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so true. Yes. Yes, because and sometimes people ask me as well, like kind of, oh, I want to have all of those gifts and I want to know everything and I want to know all of my past lives and I want to like, and I'm like, okay, well, good luck, I guess. But it's a lot of pressure, right? Like, oh, I want to have an awakening. I have to. I actually, speaking of that, I never had that particular drive. I don't ever remember myself thinking, well, I want to have an awakening. I want to like shed the ego or the confines of my humanness. Except for one moment, it was more like the beginning was more like, oh, I just want to have a deeper communion with the divine. That was all. That was my motivation. But there was one moment I remember very well. I was praying in the morning, and I said, God, I know this is a dangerous prayer, but I really have to ask because that's all I want. Please clear. It went something like, well, please clear what is within me that resists deeper union with you. That didn't go well. It worked, but oh my gosh, that it sent me into a few years of deep shadow work. Yeah, it shattered my whole life basically. It changed jobs, countries. Yeah, long story. So it works, but yeah, we be careful with kind of those big awakenings. They can shatter the whole world.
Right, right. Um, and then you also said that it was more of a letting go, more of realizing what you aren't, and that's what keeps showing up. And I so identify with that, that this there's just this thin veneer of ideas we have about how life should be, how we should be, and when they're gone, the fluidity that turns out is always there is not stable, but it's so real, it's so potent, and you mentioned that too, and that first moment or that particular moment when you realize that you could be everything. What you are isn't limited to just being brave. It can be afraid.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, so true. Yes, it's a very, and it's so strange because it's like it's looking for it, right? And it's kind of create, and I still notice that within myself. Oh, I have to do this, I have to do that, I have to be a certain person to get there, right? To get to a higher stage, higher spiritual station. But when it happens, it kind of it just appears. It's like, okay, a layer being peeled off, but I almost feel like, oh, I haven't done anything. It's like I landed, and the mind kind of struggles to capture it and understand it. And I'm even thinking, well, but how can I help others? Like, how can I help others see or understand? And I realize, actually, the struggling, I can't do that. No idea. It's like, oh, it happens in a second and it happens in a lifetime, right? And both are true at the same time.
Exactly. It happens in a second and it happens in a lifetime. Um, we can't make ourselves be more of what we already are. We can just stop pretending that we're something else. It's and the pretending is so habitual that
Yeah.
there be we'll see through it and then we're like, oh, I don't have to do that. And how did we see suddenly I don't have to do that? It's simply just a natural thing that seems to arise, and the willingness to notice it when it rises up, that's about the most we can bring is willingness.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so true. Yes, it's the pretending. I love that. Yeah, and I still notice it, and it's sometimes I'm like, oh my gosh, I've done it again. I went on a tangent, and that was the whole construct, the whole personality, whole image I created. Like my teacher calls them, images. So there's like, oh, there is that it has to be a particular way. and it brings so much constriction and so much suffering. And like recently, just in the beginning of the week, I thought, oh my gosh, I've been creating so much work for myself. Like so much to do that it was no point. It was just like kind of to keep myself thinking I'm busy. And oh, I've been really hard on myself. There was no need to be so hard. And there is much more flow and space available. So it kind of, yeah, it's kind of, I just, I'm wondering, you know, oh yes, but I was going to ask, I'm wondering why this happens. And I can share with you, there was this, it was a beautiful moment, and I'll try to capture it, but it's probably not very capturable. But it actually happened in a Sufi retreat as we were in that particular tradition. They do a lot of whirling, and whirling kind of takes you into a super state, kind of the higher state. It's not necessarily an altered state in kind of that common perception where you go high up in the clouds, but it takes you to a different place. And I remember having that dialogue with the divine, or if you like, with the higher self, however you like to formulate it. And I said, but why? What? Take this ego. I'm a bit of a maximalist there. Oh, take this ego away from me. I'm so tired of this burden, the burden of ego. Take it away from me. And I got a very soft answer, like a whisper, like a hand of a very, very delicate lover that like takes you, oh, are you comfortable with this step and the next step and the next step? And he just said, but whom shall I dance with? Who will I dance with then if there is no ego? And I was like, oh, yeah.
That's beautiful. Really, it is only our illusion of control that wants to get rid of anything, it turns out. What we are is truly, truly cherishing every experience, the experience that looks like struggle and the experience that looks like peace. It's fascinating to have an experience.
Yeah. Yeah. It's
Yeah.
exactly that. Yeah.
That's interesting that you brought that up because that is something that came up for me just in the past few weeks of realizing, oh, there goes the mind habit of creating a to-do list and thinking about it more than it needs to. And so I thought, okay, I can feel the pain of the to-do list more than I've ever felt it, which is interesting that that's kind of how the precursor of a letting go often happens. I'll feel, oh, this has become painful. Not that it wasn't before, it's just the sensitivity to that particular thing arises. And then there's a knowing, oh, that must mean it's about to go away because there's not a willingness to go through that much pain. And so I just knew, okay, I can't think about my to-do list unless I actually need to look at it. The rest of the time, I can't. It's too painful. And it's just this releasing into, of course, nothing is needed.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's fascinating. But that is the experience. It's kind of the limited meeting the unlimited, and that is the dance. And I know I had another thing that um, I well, only the past 3 4 years. And I think that was kind of the deeper awakening that's been happening also during this time, where I kind of tried to stay on top of the mountain, right? You have an experience. I kind of have, oh, I have it. Yes, I kind of captured that moment. That's where I want to stay. And of course, we forget best case scenario, worst case scenario, right? There is a crash. It's like, oh, things are like, I'm stressing out again. I forget where I was coming from. And it used to be so painful. It's like, oh no, I have to stay in a monastery on top of the mountain. It's like, it's too much. And maybe it's true for a while, like kind of building that strength, building that capacity to navigate those states, maybe for a time, right? It needs this, I have to return to particular structure, particular framework. And I remember, and that's why I ended up in the Sufi context, because it first happened there. I remember that, coming back from a retreat, and I felt, you know what, it's okay. I'm not supposed to stay on top of the mountain. It's not possible. And I'm actually okay with that. I'm good. And there was a peace and a softening and more allowing. And I felt that, oh, okay, now I can relax a little more. That's it. It's good. It's going to be okay now.
Yes, yes. The peak bliss moments or whatever, they're just experiences. They're not what we are. And what we are doesn't depend upon circumstances or states at all. And you're so right that um, there will oftentimes be the egoic structure, habits will reformulate when something peak has happened in order to try to diminish being out of control. So then
Mhm.
there is a willingness to say, okay, wait, I'm going to increase my capacity to stay in this state. But then there's the other side of being attached to it, and the true sense of what is real says, oh, right, it doesn't require anything because it's what I am, this that I am. It doesn't matter. And the that's the non-duality, the full embrace. And the full embrace, the willingness to have that full embrace, it comes when it comes. You can't even make that happen. But that willingness, I think, is really a hallmark um, that a deeper letting go has happened because there isn't an attachment to anything looking any particular way.
Yeah, 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 because it's like, and I think that happened so often, at least in my case, and I'm noticing that I'm recognizing that now, that you're kind of fighting ego with ego. Like what you're saying, oh, I have to stay there, I have to keep that state, I have to, like, keep getting high from the spirit or whatever. It'll just, yeah, I want to have those experiences, I need to stay in it, because otherwise I'll just keep collapsing. And it's that and eventually, right, it becomes a very heavy burden to carry. It's, oh my gosh, how do I stay on top of the mountain, because I can't. Yeah, yeah. And again, as I'm saying it, I kind of think, okay, but what happened, like what changed? I've no idea. I've no idea what changed.
Right, right, exactly. We're not, there's no control of the process except for the inner aliveness that
Yeah,
is a constant flag. It's a light. It's worth everything. And we don't know what that means, it's worth everything, until something comes up and we're like, oh, really? It's worth this too. It's worth looking stupid. It's worth being out of sorts when I wanted to make myself look good. It's worth letting something not get done. Or it could be it's worth taking action when I didn't feel like it, but I can feel the aliveness is saying take action. It's worth just following whatever its guiding is.
yeah, yeah,
I have
yeah.
the sense that for me this life um, is a game at learning to see, can I enjoy all of it? Like if I'm still like, okay, not that part though, then
Uh-huh.
I haven't finished this game. That when I've got, which at this point feels pretty clear, that, oh yeah, I can enjoy all of it, whatever shows up. I'm curious, I'm interested, I'm engaged, I'm willing. There's that willingness to enjoy all of it, to me, is has really been like, oh yeah, that's more what it's like. It's not some permanent bliss state. It's a willingness to enjoy anything.
Yes. Yes, 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 not a permanent bliss. It's exactly that. Yeah, yeah. And I know that somehow I had, and it's probably collective conditioning as well, that kind of a higher spiritual state is a permanent bliss state, right? That you are kind of, you're just going to be, oh, hallelujah. Like, I forgive everyone. And it's not sustainable, right? Because well, you have to chop wood and carry water. Eventually, you can at least make a meal for yourself. So, and those times when I've, oh, this is, that worldly stuff is too gross, too heavy, too too much, but it sets myself up for such a strong inner conflict. It's being in the state of war. It's like, I'm more and more at war. So it's been quite fascinating to recognize it. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's what it's like. And then it becomes, it's kind of, but it becomes difficult because the mind wants to explain. And okay, step one, step two, step three, boom, enlightened.
That inner war, that is such a great noticing, because the part that looks like it's good is usually the part starting the war. So we know that that is our mental construct, because it is actually the thing that's in conflict with whatever is. So anytime that we can feel, oh wow, catch ourselves in an inner war, oh yes, yesterday I was at work. Um, it was very busy at the ER. I went to get a patient. Turned out they couldn't be seen there, and I had to move them, but I had my machine to move, so they had to help themselves part of the way. And so she says to me, "This is so unprofessional." And I really didn't know what to say. Usually I try to say something to sympathize and then help them, feel like that's valid, and we're trying to do the best we can. But I literally I could not think what to say to her because she was right. Yeah, in an ideal world we would have had extra people to help her while I was moving my machine. And I don't even remember what I said. And I thought, wow, she's gonna write a big complaint. But, as the exam went, I just focused on showing concern and care, and giving information as much as I could. And by the end, she was in such a happy mood. And I don't even know how that happened. I did nothing. but but the fact that I was willing to completely be with where she was and not have anything to say, that seemed to be the perfect thing. There's so much to be said about just doing nothing, just noticing intently exactly what is happening, noticing intently the war that our thought structure is trying to do, just noticing it in all of its details, and it starts to just kind of pitter out.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, it's that's the mystery. It becomes uh intangible. It's almost like, well, you step back, right? I step back and I observe, and the mind struggles very much with it because it says, well, no, no, you have to figure it out first. Step A, step two, step B, step C, four, five, six. um and that's the state of inner war, but like just stepping back and allowing. And I know my mind would then kick in and say, well, but that's passivity. Like, what you're going to do, just sit there and allow? Well, you're not going to get anything done this way. Like, interfere, go to war.
Yes, yes, the mind is addicted to problem solving. There's one point where I was like, okay, so I've kind of solved everything in my life. And look at me. Now I'm solving all my friends' problems, all my family members' problems. I'm just in on the hospital's problems. I'm in on the political problem. Like the mind is addicted to problem solving. And once I got just how addicted it was like, oh yeah, it's not significant. It's just a habit. It's not
Yeah.
significant. Doing the same thing every day, resolving the same problems every day.
Yeah. Yeah, it's true. It's just that's what it does. And I know my teacher said just recently, and kind of it was helpful to remember that the mind, it asks questions because that's what it's made to do. Like you said, it's addicted to problem solving, but it cannot get answers. It only asks questions. Like for example, like I did, Akashic record readings for many years, and I get that a lot because people come in and they think that a perfect answer exists, right? Or like, I don't know, whatever it is, like, what is my lesson here, and what lesson does this person give me, and what should I do there, and what should I do there, and then they don't like the answers because it's not, because that's not the actual issue, and they don't know what the issue is. But it's the same, like, my mind works in exactly the same way. Oh, you're just gonna, Lisa is going to give me a perfect answer. Lisa is going to solve my problem for me, and Lisa gives me an answer, and I don't like that answer because obviously there's something else there, and I don't know what it is. Oh my god.
Right? It's so true. The mind will focus on what do I need to do, and reality flows much more along the lines of how am I going to be with this? And the how, out of the how comes the what. And the what can change. First, yes, I'm supposed to allow it, and then I'm supposed to do something that is constructive about it. But they're within the same how. And it was only once I got into the how that the what could show up. So the how for me, it arises a lot in stillness, not in problem solving. Just and in a trust that there's a different timing than what the mind thinks. So as I relax into, okay, well, what is going to be the natural timing here? And as I
Mhm.
relax in stillness, then that starts to create this space for the more true how to show up.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it comes, yes, from the stillness, from that higher part, the part that is not the mind, right? That's the paradox. The mind asks questions, but the other part has answers. So like in that story was whirling, right? They have to dance together because they just dance together. And it's funny, yeah, that most of my life I wanted to kill the ego, right? But then there's no one to dance with.
Yes, exactly. We fall in love with the human. We fall in love with the experience of limitation. We fall in love with the experience of not being enough and seeing what shows up.
Yeah, 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 also that. Yes. Yes, fall in love with the, and it's also funny how it often comes up by itself, right? As I try to be, spiritual, or oh, I'm so evolved, and then something just pours out of me. I say some rubbish, right? Or remember an old funny story, or oh, there's this 10 years ago we all decided to, I don't know, steal something. It's like, what did I just say? Oh, I could have said something much more evolved. But it's kind of the, that it seeks the balance, kind of creating something immediately creates its opposite, right? So that polarity, it comes out. And just shows kind of mirrors the whether there is a strong polarization or not, which is amusing sometimes.
Yes, it's so true. I love my relationship with my husband for that reason, because um, he is a much more laid back general personality type. And because of that, he really comes across way more loving because there's just no expectation. I mean, discovery is just so natural for him. And when the to-do mind gets busy, it will be like, why is he so slow? Blah, 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 blah. But always, he's always loving. I mean, it just doesn't stop with him. It
Mm.
never stops. He's so loving. And I know that that is, in the end, way more important. It's just so obvious. It's way, way more important. Nobody on their deathbed, nobody on the other side looks back and says, oh, yeah, I should have achieved more. No, it's always about, I should have related more. I should have appreciated more. I
Yeah.
should have loved more. Um, and then finally, it got to the point where I was like, and you, Lisa, picked him as your husband. And that was another like, oh, right. That means at the deepest part of me, that value is that strong. And it was, it was a, it was an opening to my own greatness, opening to the greatness coming forth through me.
Yeah.
And oftentimes that is what we're afraid to see. We're afraid to see, wow, I'm actually strong enough to handle this. Or I'm actually loving enough to be the space for this. It's we put ourselves in situations and then we're trying to claw ourselves out. But it turns out that we we are bigger and we already knew we were bigger.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, afraid of our own greatness sometimes. No, well, not sometimes, I guess all the time, right? I yeah, I agree. Yeah, and it's exactly that, right? You chose him as your husband. It's that love that is mirrored to you. So it's a reflection of that greatness, which is absolutely beautiful. I think, yeah, and I had to face that a lot, that I was afraid of my own goodness and of my own greatness more than the shadow part. Shadow I was very comfortable with. Oh yeah, yeah, I'm just a loser and a bum. Yeah, of course. But but the greatness was difficult to see. So yeah, and it's amazing how this conditioning, where it was last year, when it suddenly, as I was going through some childhood stuff, really just kind of as part of one exercise, and I thought, but you know what, I could have been anything else. It's these are particular experiences and particular situations have moved my life into a particular direction, but that's not who I am. That's not all that I am. It's just a particular framework, and it's not good or bad. It just is. But there was this awareness that, oh my goodness, it's just a framework, like it's just an image. And had a word been said in different circumstances, I don't know, Inga would have gone to, I don't know, Tahiti instead of Jerusalem, right? And a whole different story would have happened. So it was such a weird realization. I hope it makes sense.
Yeah, well, I'm getting the taste of it, but I'd like you to elaborate a little bit more. So you recognize in that moment that, oh, there's a greatness here I haven't totally acknowledged within me, and maybe tease that out a little bit more.
Yeah, I guess it felt like the experiences, um, I used to identify with my experience or with my perceptions, right? So, for example, I don't know, my grandmother told me I'm not good at cleaning. And so I assumed that I'm a person who is not good at cleaning. But if my grandmother had told me I'm good at cleaning, I might have been a person who assumed she's good at cleaning. And it never clicked for me that it's not who I am. Like, kind of, good at cleaning, bad at cleaning, talking, whatever. Like, right, I speak English because my father put me like to studies when I was 5 years old. He made me study English. Could have made me study, I don't know what, French, for example, and then I'd be talking to someone else, but it would still be that me having an experience, and kind of those boundaries of self at that point, they became a little bit blurry, and I'm like, you know what, i'm I'm not fully defined. It's like something bigger came in, right? That there is that soul, there is that aspect that is actually beyond what I call me, beyond that kind of, oh yeah, Inga is bad at cleaning, Inga speaks English, blah, blah, blah. And suddenly there was an awareness, this is just a framework. Oh yeah, what happened, it was that's because that's the framework that it is that. And because certain choices were made, fished out of the quantum sea, right? And now it's there, but the me is bigger than that. And ultimately it's not defined by any. When I die, I'll go back to the sea, where this will be just an experience, right? But I'll be bigger than that. And that was so liberating, because I kind of, oh, you know what, it's it's okay, right? My dear grandmother said I wasn't good. I'm just using it as an example. It's not a deep-seated childhood trauma. There have
Yes.
been worse things in life. But oh, the grandmother said I'm not good at cleaning. Okay, then and it felt good. Oh my goodness, it just, I thought it defined me, but it actually doesn't. It's just an experience. Yeah, and it helped me. It's a kind of, it was liberating, and I'm able to, since then, I've been able to let go and allow those experiences more. Like, okay, I believe this today. It's not necessarily what I'm going to believe tomorrow. I mean, like in matters of opinion, right? For example, I don't know, right? Well, I believe this guy on the news is telling the truth. Tomorrow I'll learn something, right? And I'll find out he's not telling the truth. Okay, well, that was yesterday, that's today. There is kind of less attachment, less pain associated with it. Okay, well, I knew that yesterday, today I know better, so I'm not listening to him or eating that or doing this. And yeah, that that helps.
Yes.
That
Oh,
helps.
I think that that is one of the best practices, to just look back and notice, oh yeah, right. Like I had an attachment that being smart had to look a certain way, get certain degrees, being successful had to look a certain way. I couldn't have a divorce. Then I got a divorce. There were so many little things that I had defined as what my good person was supposed to look like, or my successful person, or my whatever. And then each time it didn't work out. And
Yeah.
yet it turned out that what I was bigger because of it, not smaller. Turns out, after something that looks like a disappointment shows up, what comes in is something even better, a new creativity, a new strength, and from hindsight, it's so obvious. And so now when something comes up that I am seeing as a hurdle, immediately is, oh, wow. So when I get through this, I'm going to realize something even bigger about this that I am. So that doesn't mean I'm in love with the hurdle in the moment. It just means that there's this life that is more interested in propelling through the hurdle than in avoiding it.
Yeah. Yeah,
And it has to be
exactly. Yeah.
through, not a bypass. It has to be a through.
Yeah, but through. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah, and it's liberating. It's kind of allowing those it today I am this and tomorrow I may be something else, and it's okay. And but it's not, yeah, but it's exactly this. It is kind of, it's not bypassing, it's not, oh, nothing matters. It's not that while I'm experiencing it, and I like that. And I think maybe that was also one of the things, coming back to kind of Jerusalem and the Middle East people. And because I lived in Northern Europe at the time, and it's very mellow. And I was very, I loved the passion and the difference of opinion and people yelling at each other. And well, stop at that, at the yelling at each other part. I know there's more, but it's also kind of reflective of a multitude of things, but it was so liberating. Oh, somebody, people care, and then they would stop yelling at each other and eat together, right, as if nothing happened. But of course it's just, it's kind of it's allowing those energies to pass through, and then you do what you always do, and it was liberating. I loved that. I loved kind of expressing the passion and having opinions. And then of course I came back to Northern Europe, and I'd be like, no. And people would be, oh my gosh, she's really angry. I'm not angry. I'm just expressing my opinions. It's fun.
It's so fun. The fluidity is just wonderful. Yeah. So when it came time at some point, I'm sure, to really get a full understanding that we love ourselves. We love this experience of being human. We love the limitations it brings. What were some of the processes that helped you come through that?
Yeah. Well, I guess we started on self-love with those, kind of, remembering the greatness, right? And allowing these things to flow through. Self-love is something I've been working on all my life. It's an interesting one. Somehow, I internalized the let's say, negativity or the shadow or whatever, right? So it's kind of not outward, but inward, growing up. And so it was, I'm still learning. It's interesting to observe how, the ego tries to make to-do lists, and say, if you failed to do that, then you're worse than, and you haven't reached the target. So I'm trying to remember this piece, I think, that I just shared, in terms of my experiences ultimately do not define my essence, right? The Whatever is passing through me, whatever energy, whatever emanation or divine name is passing through my being, it's not all that I am. And so that self-love, maybe it sounds a little bit too transcendent, but that's kind of what helped me. It's kind of seeing that, well, I am not good and not bad. I'm neither of these things. I am my essence is something bigger than kind of what I think I am. So not identifying with the critical mind, because self-love, it's going to me, was always more than, I understand the expression, right? It can be, well, making myself beautiful, and or eating well, or taking a bath, right, or going to, yes, that's part of it. But because I suppose I was always searching and kind of on more, let's say, spiritually oriented, or thinking that I was more spiritually oriented, it was the identifying with the essence of something bigger than my ego, because the ego for me, it has a very critical voice. It's the voice of that, the inner male, the bad inner male that is like, no, you can't do that, you can't do that, you're bad. And so recognizing it as just a voice and a character in the play, and okay, well, you have your monologue, now I'm going to have mine. That helped. It's liberating. There is a strength and a power that I've been feeling, and I'm thinking like, oh my gosh, where does this come from? It's like I don't have to guard my boundaries ferociously anymore. They are just there. People recognize them. I go, well, that's a nice change. Um, but I don't know how, like, I haven't I haven't taken 20 courses on the art of boundaries, right? So it just happened. And I think it's just connecting to that. And like in the Sufi traditions, they would call them the names of power, right? It's kind of those other qualities, the stricter ones. They're actually more feminine energies than masculine. So it's moving beyond that. Let's say for me, it's identifying the inner critic as exactly what it is, right? The inner critic, but not me, not the actual kind of essence of me.
Yes. Oh, that's beautiful. I mean, just that moment of putting the inner critic out. Like, oh wow, this isn't innate. This is just an activity. And in that sense, it's optional because what I am is so much bigger. Um, Looking at the inner critic that way, it actually for me became a point of surrender. Like, okay, if I'm going to pay homage and obey the inner critic as a Lord, as a God, as an authority, as a judge, wow, that is that is this being submitting to something that's clearly not even kind.
Yeah.
So it was this, okay, but there's something else. There's a freedom, there's a lovingness, there's an aliveness that is willing and glorious and magnificent and able to be good enough. Doesn't have to be the little model of goodness, just good
Yes.
enough, kind enough, intelligent enough, successful enough, not fitting into any box. And it was kind of this surrender, like, okay, the this this burgeoning knowing is going to rest in this bigger place and surrender the control that the inner critic seems to provide. It's not true. It's not a true control at all. And it was handing over. I mean, what is this? We're just one, but it felt like a handing over. Like, okay, I release. I give up the inner critic. This is my sacrifice. That means I don't criticize myself. I love my experiences. And that was the other thing, is that I couldn't, um, loving self, right? There's all the taking care of your body and that kind of thing. But in the end, it was whatever shows up to be expressed in this moment. I love that.
Yeah.
Discovered that what we are is in love with loving weakness, is in love with loving shyness, is in love with loving uncertainty. It's because all these things are showing up, and I'm like, really? So, this that I am wants to love this too. Absolutely. Absolutely. And it takes time to fully expand into it. It's kind of like um, blowing up a stuffed animal, when you get just the shell, and then you've got to fill it in with all the stuffing. You fill in the stuffed animal, and it fills in naturally, as long as there's as long as It feels unnaturally. And
It
when
just
it's
does.
happening, we notice that there's a letting go of the inner critic.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Because it's kind of it's when I self-ident, that's the problem, right? I self-identifying with the inner critic, like, oh, that is me, and recognize it's not me. It's just a part of me. It's like that voice that talks rubbish. Sometimes, oh, I mean, it has a point. Sometimes it's okay. It's kind of okay. You have a place at the board of directors, but you're not going to run my life because you're never happy. You're just never happy. There's nothing I can do that will ever make you happy. Oh,
Yes, that's the clarity that it is never satisfied. Never. Yeah.
it's amazing, isn't
Yeah.
it?
Yeah. Exactly. Anything in us that is never satisfied, that's always looking for the next thing, looking for the next thing. It's just an attempt at finding control when there's no control.
Yeah, yeah, it's true. It's always the next thing. Okay, now you've learned that. Well, now it's time to learn another thing and another thing and another thing. Well, it's never enough. And sometimes we have that, right? It kind of in sometimes, like say in the field that I work in, sometimes people tell me, oh, I know like 10 different healing modalities and I took like a million courses and I still have no idea what I'm doing. But it's the inner critic, right? Take this course. No, you're still not good enough. Take this course and take this course and it will never end. It's
Yes.
forever. Like you'll be taking courses until the rest, yeah, and basically until the day you die, because it's never satisfied. It's never happy. Like, yeah, you still don't know, and it's true. I don't know enough. Most likely, you don't know enough. It's not wrong, but it's not the way to live, right?
Right, right. You don't you don't notice that rest is possible until you stop running. It's not like, oh, finally you reach a end mark and now rest is allowed. No, rest happens when you just rest. There's
Yeah,
no mark where it says rest time now.
yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. That's another good one. Yes. Yes, it just happens when you allow it. Yeah, and there is kind of no one can. Yeah. Well, I mean, unless you run a marathon and then die midway. But yeah, it's exactly that. Well, I'm going to contemplate on this one, on the rest. I like that. There's something that stirs for me in it. I'll contemplate it.
Yeah, yes. I realize when I'm on vacation, I will still have things that I'm interested in doing. There'll be what looks like a little list of things I'm going to go see or hikes I'm going to do, whatever. Um, but there's no burden about them because it's vacation. And that's the attitude that now I find happening in life. Like, oh, yeah, so having something to do doesn't mean there's something to do. It just means
Mm.
there's there's some pointers lying around. And
Yeah.
in the right timing, I'll go to each of those. There's um no end date. There's no whatever deadline. There's no deadline. There's no deadline in anything. There's no deadline. So if the body says, I need to rest, or the heart says, I need to rest, or the mind says, I need to rest, it's allowed. And what's also my inner fear is, oh my gosh, it's going to need 3 days of rest. The
Yeah.
amazing thing is true rest, 30 seconds is amazing, or it could be 5 minutes or 30 minutes. But the amount of rest that comes in that true rest, it doesn't, so this surrendering into,
No.
yeah, I'm gonna rest doesn't mean now I'm gonna be like gone for weeks and weeks. Not at all. It turns out there's the willingness to rest, and then it's amazing how nurturing the rest is. And then all of a sudden there's the aliveness saying, okay, ready to do something.
Yeah. Yeah, that's why the spiritual masters are often reported, right? That they sleep very little. There were some that made it very difficult for their students because, like, say, a master would sleep only 2 hours, and then you'd have his disciples trying to stay awake. But that's why I think, because there is that, right? That they captured the secret of true rest, and yeah, I heard that, and I'm noticing it myself. Like, I know that, well, inner battle for sure. It takes a lot of effort. It takes a lot of energy. That no wonder, kind of, I was knocked out by the end of the day after all of the inner battle. It's so hard. Oh,
Really, it is way more than anything anybody ever does to ourselves. It is that voice that hurts us more than anything else, especially anything that happens that looks difficult, it's over. And then the mind rehashes it. And that is where
yeah,
the trauma happens. In the moment, we survive right through. But the trauma happens when the mind is analyzing it and blaming and saying what ifs and this should have been. And yeah, that's the deeper trauma.
yeah, of course. Yeah, 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 yeah. And it's also kind of being kicked out of, or like it's stuck in a time loop. So it begins like like those ghost stories, the lady appearing on the stairs, right, where she died, and it just goes on and on and on forever. For in the case of a ghost, for centuries maybe, and it's like, I can't let it go. I'm going to suffer. Nobody can stop me from suffering.
Right. Exactly. And I'm not diminishing, of course, there are times that are really, really difficult. And of course, there's a process of learning how to release that and heal from that. I'm not diminishing that in any way, but I'm just pointing out that so often our mental habit is to actually make it worse.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's true. And there are horrible things happening, of course, all the time in the world. But also then you see that, sometimes there is a liberation and sometimes there is a perpetuating of the loop over and over. And it creates more suffering. Ultimately, yeah, it's not in my power to, or my or my mission to kind of to judge responses to heavy trauma and things that happen in the world, because there is plenty of that. But I love the joy that comes with more liberation.
Yes. Yes. You know, something, the more I notice about my inner processes, the more I see the world doing exactly what has happened for me. The more that I am free, the more I see all the little ways that I hurt myself and hurt others. It's amazing, things that I would have just done without thinking. Now I notice, oh wow, yeah, that was subtly putting a negative energy from myself onto someone else. I wouldn't have been able to see that before, but that there's this holding and loving available now to see it. So the the shadow work just comes up, and I to me it's a very positive thing. It means that
Yeah,
this holding, it has the capacity to see it and then to heal it. It won't let something arise that it's not also ready to heal.
of course. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think also in terms of that, um, it's just witnessing it, right? We can't really, because sometimes, well, we'll end with where we started, right? So killing the ego and so on. Because sometimes I used to, okay, well, this shadow arose, right? So now I have to do something about it. So now I have to like fix that person who doesn't love herself, or whatever. It's like, let's fix her, but it's impossible, right? Because how can I can't, obviously I haven't been able to have to do that. And but allowing, it's kind of like just shining the light on it, and you're there, and I recognize you and I see you, and I just surrender you to the higher powers, to the lights, and you just, I entrust you. um, and that's all there is. But of course, I can't make the shadow work. Oh my gosh, no, let's descend into into the underworld and do some show. uh, but it's about deepening, and it's ultimately, yeah, it's like, for me, it's about learning to trust, right? To surrender, and just to witness or observe it, not in a passive way, but more in a allowing, loving way. For me, it's definitely, it's like, like I'll shine the light of the creator on it. I recognize it, but I'm not interfering in whatever is happening next. And yeah, and that works.
It
That
really
surprisingly
does.
works.
Yes, and that I feel like is our space for the world, that there is so much that comes up and it looks like it's horrible, but it isn't. It is the natural part of this process because the whole humanity feels this change we're in, and it feels this love coming in, and so it's doing its own unraveling. And as we just increase our capacity for holding, the unraveling will just happen so naturally as it is.
Yeah. Yeah, it's increasing the capacity for holding. Yeah, yeah, I like that. It's exactly that. It's it's just expanding the container, right? Bigger cup. Yeah, that's all there is. I've been witnessing it too in my life. Yeah, it's just the expansion. I mean, yeah, it's a never-ending adventure, and it does get better. Yeah, it does get better from the early stages of primordial terror. It really does get better, because at first the ego is just going all over. Oh my goodness. And I say it to people, yeah, because some of those those initial moments, I think, like, we are often pushed into, at least I think I'm often pushed to into deeper awakening through something that doesn't work, right? Like, oh, I can't find a job, or I'm hopelessly in love, or something's not working. I have to figure out. That's how the process starts. But it's just the beginning. It's just the opening. It's also something that you said, like, there is that dissatisfaction, right? There's oh, something. um but it's just the first push. It's like, okay, and now let's look at the shells that are covering.
Yes, exactly, exactly. I just love talking with you, Inga, because you express so well the effortlessness that this is so natural. It's so natural. And it's so unpredictable. We can't know. And I just, as I discuss with you, that's what I feel so much, that it's natural and unpredictable. And whenever anything is going on, we can just reassure ourselves it's natural and it's unpredictable.
Yeah, unpredictable it is.
Well, thank you
Pretty.
so much for being with me. This has been wonderful. I really, really appreciate our time together. And I look forward to doing it again.
Thank you, Lisa. Yes, me too. I love talking to you. It's really, and it brings me, I notice how the vibration itself changes, right? It's like something comes out of the conversation that's bigger than me, and I love that too. I love spending time with you. So yes, anytime. And yes, thank you so much for having me.